It's Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers with tips and advice on landscaping and gardening. Here's Fernando Martinez.
Yes, indeed. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to another edition of this Patio Side Chats with Chaparral. And today we have another great topic for you. We're going to talk about grasses. What grasses do for landscape design? How do you incorporate them into your yard? What's the maintenance aspects of having grasses? Maybe you already have existing grasses, aren't sure how to take care of them. We also want to talk about the downsides to grasses. Why would you not want to plant grasses in your yard? I mean, I don't know if there's that many downsides, but we will go over them. And true grasses versus grass-like plants, and why does that matter? So let's jump right into it and get into the show. Grasses. I was watching a show on Discovery. What is this? Planet Earth or whatever it's called. And one amazing fact is that how much grass and grasses of that, species, that genome, we'll talk about that, covers the Earth's surface of all the land that exists on Earth. I've heard estimates from 25% to 40% of all land that on Earth is covered with grasses, which is amazing to me. And we're talking all kinds of different climates. They grow in the snow, freezing conditions. They grow in deserts, so super hot, dusty. They can get, mowed over by all kinds of herds of animals, of bison and, herds of grass-eating or vegetarian, animals, and they can be completely chewed off down to the ground, and within 2-3 days, they grow back. They were showing pictures of the grasses that were growing underwater in swamps, so I mean, just from completely dry to completely soaked, to freezing to heat, getting chewed on, stepped on, everything, you name it. Grasses are absolutely amazing. They're amazing plants. They're one of the most amazing things in the world, really. And to me, to incorporate them into our landscape and in particular into my landscape designs, I can't landscape without grasses. It's such an important topic, and it's one that I really, truly love. And I put them in on every single design, unless the customer tells me, no way, I just, hate grasses. I don't want to see any grasses in my yard. Pretty rare. I don't even remember a customer that, has, but we limit them if they don't like them or they don't like that shape or that spiky look that they have. But then, on the opposite side of that, that's what is so cool about them, is that you can complement other plantings. Not everything has to be a flowering bush, year-round flowers. When I first started out, that's kind of what you go for. You think, okay, you walk down the nursery, I want to see blooms, I want to see flowers, I want to see year-round color. And if you buy every bush that's year-round color for your landscaping and you put them out there in the planter beds, it'll look great and you'll be happy at first, but then over time, these plants that just bloom and bloom and bloom, it's just there's nothing new about them. You see them, you walk by them every day, and there's nothing exciting, and they just kind of blend in and end up blurring into the background. So I love plants that don't bloom all the time. Of course, you do a mix, and I love deciduous plants. I mean, that's just me, and to me, we don't get seasons really here on the Central Coast, and I think that's something that we tend to forget. Is just years just go by, it's something that if you lived in an area where the seasons really change how the landscape looks, it gives you a sense of what time frame it is. And, it's winter again now, and we have the holidays to kind of help us out, but our weather is just so mild. And it's why we're here too, because we're lucky to have that year round. But I like to see some things that don't look the same, throughout the entire year. Grasses is definitely one of those things, and it does need to be cut back in the winter. And so if there is any kind of negative aspect to grasses, it's so they can turn to the straw look in the winter. But I like that. I like when it changes colors and they look dead. That's a pretty common call that I get, after planting grasses, and maybe I forgot to let them know, hey, the grasses are going to go dormant in the winter and this is normal. They'll call me. I've gotten better about it these days because I'd gotten calls so much previous that they were dead. All my grasses died. Well, they're not really dead. They go dormant. And you can look at that as a bad thing, or you can look at that as a good thing and cut them back. And we'll talk about the maintenance of them. But I wanted to stick with design right now. When you're designing plantings in planters and you're putting even through an existing landscaping or you're starting new, you want contrasting things. So, a lot of shrubs have medium-sized leaves, so large-sized leaves. And, you can get the flowering ones that are pretty and blooming and fit them in there. I like to add boulders as well to landscaping. I think boulders add a nice, there's a hardness there. Because if you do everything soft with plants and bark, put your drip system, call it done, it will look good and look fine, but it won't have that pizzazz, that something special, I really think that sets it apart and makes it fun. And so when I add boulders in there, I love to see the grasses growing near the boulders. For some reason, that look of a grass, and even just almost smashed right up alongside the boulder, just plant it right next to it, so it looks like it's kind of growing out of the boulder. It's a neat way to complement the boulders and get a different leaf that's in there that's long and thin and spiky looking, and you contrast that with the bushy round leaves and blooms of another plant. Now you don't think of grasses necessarily as flowering, but they absolutely do. They have blooms and they go to seed. And okay, so back when I've been in this industry a long time, and when you learn about the grasses and you take, plant classes and all this stuff, they teach you about what's the difference between a grass and a plant. So if you look at a leaf, like let's say you take a maple leaf, for instance, and it looks kind of like a hand, it's palmate, there'll be a center line, a vein that's going down the middle, and then there'll be branches branching off like fingers. Most of the leaves that are plants all have that vein that branches off. Grasses do not. If you take a leaf of a grass and you look at it closely, all the veins of the grass are all running in the same direction. There's no branching. That's what dictates a grass versus a plant. And it's called monocot versus dicot, whatever. But it's something that's why they can have chemicals that'll kill grasses in plants, or it won't harm the grass and it kills the weeds in the lawn. The way they can differentiate that chemically is between that dicot and the monocot, where all the veins are going in a straight line. And I think there might be some plants that are considered grasses that might surprise you. Flax, for instance, is a grass, and bamboo is a grass. And again, without grasses, economies would collapse, I think. There's a lot of food and things that we take for granted that are grasses. Corn is a grass. Cereal grasses like wheat, rice, barley. Barley especially is a very important ingredient. And so, grasses are amazing, and they sustain life, and they're gorgeous, beautiful. There's a lot of ornamental grasses, even lawns. Think about it. You go out there, you have your front lawn, you can play soccer on it, you can walk all over it. What plant can you walk on and smash and play soccer on, and it doesn't even damage it? Grasses are amazing. And, I know, the drought but think about when people shut their sprinklers off and they let them get dry and the whole lawn appears dead completely. And then as soon as you start watering again, they come back. It's amazing. And they're very tolerant, and there is, I can understand you don't want, a golf course at your house necessarily, but there's a place for grasses, and that definitely includes lawns. And I'm still not sold 100%. We have to rip all of our lawns out. I mean, to limiting the size of them. But if for the usability, lawns have been a key part of our yards and for pets and kids and, relaxing, golf, putting greens, whatever. But for ornamental grasses, which is kind of what more of this show is about, if you have taken your lawn out or you lose, or maybe you don't have the space for a lawn in your backyard and you want more patio space, it's very common. And I totally get it. And it's the same thing in my backyard. I would way rather have more usable space than a big giant grass. And so what ends up happening is you lose that color, you lose that feel, but you can put it back. You can do it with ornamental grasses that don't have to be mowed and edged and trimmed and all this stuff. I had some beautiful big tall grasses, and we'll go over some grass names. I'm going to give you some varieties to think about to landscape with. But my dogs ate them. And again, this whole going back to animals need grasses. They have, like chewing grasses, whatever it is for their digestion. I'm no animal expert, but they would chew them down to the nubs and they'd try to grow back and they'd chew them down to the nubs. They'd come back. But I couldn't enjoy them because they never were able to get up over 6-8 inches. So I dug them out of my backyard, put them in these empty 5-gallon buckets that I had, put them on the side of the house, figure I'll plant them in the front later. Forgot about them. They dried out completely in the buckets. I thought, oh my gosh, I forgot to water them. And so then I figured, well, we'll see what happens. I started watering them on the side of the house, on the north side, basically in the shade. And I started to see some green growth come out of them. So I went, we have my little rose garden across the street at my house there. And I planted one, I had 2 of them. So I planted one on each side of the rose garden. Figured if they make it, they make it. If they don't, whatever. And oh my gosh, right now, this year, it took them about a year and a half, and they are like 5-6 feet tall with these beautiful blooms that kind of come over and they look like a little paw or a hand or something, and they kind of blow in the wind gently, and they're nice green color, and then the flowers on them, the seed heads are kind of this brownish tan that contrasts with the green. It just looks so nice, and which is what I wanted in my back, because I have this block wall and I was trying to kind of soften that block wall. My dogs wouldn't let it happen, but it just amazed me how tolerant these. If I would have been any other, if I would have been a salvia or some, even just a regular like Veronica Lake plant or something, and if I would have treated it like that, dug it up, left it on the side of my house, they would have never lived, in a million years. And so this grass, I just love that it even has that story, that I was able to move it. And every time when I come home and I see them there, I think, man, those things are so cool and they're so tough and awesome. And they really, now my rose garden kind of looks complete because I have one on each end, and they're kind of like bookending, the garden. And so I don't know. To me, going back to the design aspect, there's just so many ways to use them, but putting them next to boulders, contrasting with other groupings of plants. So if you've got a lot of big leafy plants all one area, always preach, stay with the odd numbers, go with 5s, 7s, or even a mix of, 3 of one, 4 of something else, and put a grouping together of 7, then add a grass, and then add a couple boulders and maybe a 3 little grasses on that. Find out you can't always tell how they're going to bloom when you see them to purchase them at the nursery. So try to find out the name of the grass, see what types of blooms it's going to have, and incorporate those colors. I did some pots recently in Trilogy in Napomo, and I had this one grass that had the little pink blooms. It was, I believe, Pennisetum oriental, so Oriental Pennisetum, and they had these little kind of like pinkish and bluish green leaves with these pinkish flowers. And there was another plant that had the leaves were kind of the same color. There were bluish green leaves with little pink tips on the leaves, tied in beautiful. I bought a 6-pack of Polygonum or Polygonum, however you say it. And that was going to kind of fall down over the pot. It had little pink flowers that tied in with the grasses. It was this tall cobalt blue pot, and it just turned out beautiful. So grasses can be used in containers. They can be used, throughout the landscape and as accents. And so that's really how you incorporate them, in the design. And they're really the only maintenance to do. Basically, the best thing you could do is try to find out ahead of time how big they're going to get, because some stay a little small, like most people are familiar with the little blue fescue. If you're needing another more medium-sized grass, like the Mexican feather grass, flax, believe it or not, is also a grass. And the flaxes, there's all kinds of varieties, some from 6 to 8 feet tall and even bigger, all the way down to short little Jack Sprat and Tom Thumb. I think only gets about a foot and a half. So if you know ahead of time the size, the ultimate size of what the grass is going to get, and then you're very low maintenance because there's not a whole lot to do or trim. That would only be way grasses would be high maintenance if you got too big of one for a small area. Also, fountain grasses, very popular out there, and not just the purple fountain grass. I mean, you kind of see those have become almost generic. You see them everywhere. They make a really nice green fountain grass. There's dwarf fountain grasses that are really small. There's one called fireworks or firecracker or something. I mean, some pink leaves with the stripes and then the blossoms. I mean, everything. Once you start going down that road of grasses and you really start looking, and it's just, there's a grass for every situation. And again, incorporate them like we were talking about with the designs. Some other ones that you may be interested in would be miscanthus. Those can get 5-6 feet tall and have those little hand-like blooms that I was talking about. That's what I have on either side of my rose garden is a miscanthus. They come in striped leaves, green leaves, and just very striking. Also, Japanese bloodgrass has red tips on it, which can really accent. You tie those colors in with either a red flower or contrast with even the blue greens, like a lavenders, or plants that you plant things in areas where the colors go together and they kind of complement each other. So if you're going these blue greens, to kind of feel, and soft blues and pinks or whatever, stay in those color schemes. If you're going bright colors with bright yellows and reds and oranges, know what you're doing. For instance, if you are going with that blue grayish green, blue oak grass is another one that fits right in with that scheme of colors and feels and softness. Papyrus. And I tend to forget about papyrus because that plant has been around forever. They used to make paper out of it, and they would smash it up in the pulp and whatever. And some of the first paper that was ever made was made from papyrus. That's a water-loving plant, and it can go in water features. It's got the very long, thick green stem, and then it comes up with these poofs of, the heads on them looks like a firework or like a mop kind of, on the top. And they're so beautiful with water features and can provide a really nice backdrop. So papyrus, black mondo grass. If you remember mondo grass, it comes in green, of course, and mondo grass has been planted for a long time. Could be considered an old-fashioned plant, but if you get the black mondo grass, oh my gosh, it's amazing to look at. It's so dark. But again, you have to contrast it out with something to get it to pop. If you're looking for something for the shade, liriope is a nice grass, and they've been around for a long time. Tough as nails plant, hard to kill, takes drought tolerant, believe it or not. A lot of these grasses are drought tolerant. They take very little water, and the liriope has blue blooms that come up and they go to seed. I've got some grasses in my front yard in the full sun called ruby grass. Amazing. When they're flowering, the seed heads are so burgundy and they shimmer in the light as they move, and they look like rubies. I mean, I don't know how, you can do a landscape, like I say, without grasses. It's absolutely key in my opinion. Now, if you don't want to do any maintenance at all, and you don't want to go through that cutback phase in the winter, and you want them to look like grasses year round, there is a way to do that, and there's 2 varieties of plants that I'm going to tell you about right on the other side. This show is brought to you by Airval Block. Concrete paving stones or pavers are not all created equal. Airval block pavers are created from a dry mix of gravel, sand, cement, and color. With very little water used, they're super strong. They won't crack or fade. And to be an Airval block paver, the gravel and sand come from right here on the Central Coast, supporting our local community. Airval Block is the only local manufacturer of concrete masonry products like pavers, mortarless retaining wall blocks. Airval block products are high quality for peace of mind, and there are many colors to choose from. And if you're not sure which products you need or how to use them, you will always get expert advice from the staff at Airval Block. Products made on the Central Coast for the Central Coast. Visit their fully landscaped outdoor showroom to see the many ways you can use Airval Block products at number 1 Suburban Road in San Luis Obispo, or go online at airvalblock.com. If you're thinking about putting in a new pavers patio or a paver driveway, call Chaparral Pavers, 805-588-6917. The best paver installer on the Central Coast. Check out their portfolio and customer reviews online. ILoveToComeHome.com. That's Chaparral Pavers, 805-588-6917. And on the web, ILoveToComeHome.com. Okay, we're back. And as promised, I will give you a couple varieties of plants here that are very grass-like, look exactly like grasses, and they don't go dormant. They don't need any cutting back. So that was the only kind of downside that there really was to grasses, true grasses, is that they'll go dormant in the winter and you cut them down. And I always tell people leave about 2-3 inches above the ground and give them a haircut, basically a buzz cut right across the top and get rid of all of that. The worst thing you could do, it would be to not do it, which is really fine. I mean, the grass doesn't care. But then with all that dry kind of straw look in the springtime, if you don't cut them back before spring comes and the new leaves come out from the base of the grass, it's virtually impossible to get all that straw out of the grass, and they end up looking terrible for a whole year. Or you have to cut them back after they've already grown and spent all that energy growing. You have to cut off all the new leaves. So that would be kind of a tragedy. So definitely, even if your grasses don't look like they need it, no later than say February, early March, just cut them back. I've got some miscanthus in my front yard that I cut back twice a year because they get so big in the middle of summer. We go ahead and cut them back, and they come back again like a brand new grass. And then again, I cut them back in, anytime between late December and early March. And it kind of goes by the weather. If it stays cool, which again, the Central Coast here, we don't really have a whole lot of cool weather. But if it's an exceptionally cold year, it'll snap them into that dormancy, and which is actually good for the plant. Now, going back to the two varieties that are not grasses and do not need to be cut back is the sedges. That's sedges, sedge, and also the rushes. There's two types of plants in rush, just like it sounds. The rushes and sedges are very grass-like plants that are wonderful to use, exactly how you would use grasses in design and everything, and yet you don't have to do any maintenance at all. One that comes to mind that I've been using a lot lately is Lomandra Breeze. Super, super dark green, looks exactly like the color of a gorgeously well-fed lawn with very little fertilizer, extremely drought tolerant, looks fantastic near water features, even though it doesn't need a whole lot of water, and looks great up against boulders. I like to use them, a lot of them in one area close together. Like a normal plant spacing, 3 feet to 6 feet. Some, you put trees 10, 12 feet apart and you space things out. When it comes to these types of rushes and sedges, they don't get very big usually. And so I'm sure there's some varieties out there that do whatever. You can call me on it, or you can send us the deal on Twitter, or be one of our 12 followers or whatever we have on there. But when you plant them close together, they make a statement. It's more like putting them in groupings of 5 or 7 and maybe space them 1 foot apart. You can really 1.5 foot maybe, and stagger them and angle them, so it doesn't look like a straight line of grasses. and feature them around. I do it. We had made this water feature out of basalt columns. We had 3 basalt columns in this basin that we buried under the ground, and you fill it with water. Believe it or not, holds like 75, 80 gallons of water underground, so it never runs out of water. It's got the little door. You put the pump in there, and anyway, you put the 3 basalt column stones on top, and just bubbles out. They're drilled down the middle, and they bubble out of the top there. And the only plant I put around them was like 7 of these lavender breeze, which are absolutely amazing. And you know what? They work great in pots too, because they're kind of like this moppy hair looking. I think of like these, at Halloween, they have those jack-o'-lantern planters. You put one in there and it just looks like it's got a hairdo. I mean, there's so much fun that you can have with the sedges. There's another one that comes to mind, Carex. Really popular, readily available. Most nurseries, you got go in there and ask them for a Carex, Carex. They have these bronze rust color looking ones that I love to use. Again, you're not only contrasting the big giant foliage with the thin narrow leaves of grasses and sedges, and you get the color correct, or opposite, or however you want to look at it in the design. But when you have everything's all green and then you add in this, this rust color orangey Carex, it's incredible, and it just really stands out over dark or stained barks that are really dark, and then, or even just dark soil, and then you see this, this color pop of this rusty. So Carex is a really good one. The lomandras, I think most people are familiar with that horsetail, which is kind of like a reed grass. Those can be invasive, and actually some grasses can also be invasive as well. So look into that. Like I mentioned, Mexican feathergrass earlier, they can reseed very readily. Now, you may like that, and then you get extra free plants just growing up in your yard, or that may bother you and you don't want to, or maybe it comes up in your neighbor's yard. You want to be a good neighbor and you don't want, Mexican feathergrass is coming up all down the block. So be aware of that. Decide what you want to do. But there are some other, there's another one called Chorapetalum. I don't want to get too crazy on names here, but it's similar to that horsetail, but it looks like it, but it's not, and it's not invasive. And so it's called Cape Rush. And, sometimes you get in trouble with the common names, but like I say, the rushes are not true grasses. They do not have to be cut back. The Cape Rush is a little deserty looking, so it would go really well with native plants, or, this Mediterranean style that we seem to plant a lot here. And when you get that kind of, with salvias and the manzanitas and ceanothus, you're planting, along that native kind of Mediterranean theme, the Cape Rush can look incredible with that. They look very striking in front of buildings, especially if it's a earth tone kind of color, maybe a tan, or I've seen like this orangey brownish light tans or whatever that, and you put this dark green Cape Rush in front, you can put a light on it, and oh my gosh, it can really be dramatic at night. It looks great during the day with the building as the backdrop to this Cape Rush. Really thin reed-like leaves, and some of them, again, be careful because make sure you don't always just listen to the nursery guy. Oh, how big do these get? 3 feet, and then you plant them in the ground. They're 8-10 feet tall. The Chorapetalums are can be that way as well. Some of them will get really tall, but there are dwarf varieties of it, and it's extremely hard to tell when they're small and small pots. And so look for the tag in there and verify, with the nursery help. Hopefully there's somebody there to tell you and steer you in the right direction. So just to kind of review this show on grasses, they're amazing, amazing plants growing in about any condition you can dream up of on Earth, and incorporating them into your landscaping and your design of new or existing, it's absolutely crucial and can really lift the design up and make your yard beautiful and really highlight boulders and spots and the rest of the plants and contrast and colors. Oh, it's just amazing. So thanks for tuning in to another show, and we will see you next week for another great topic.
This has been Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers. Go to ilovetocomehome.com to find out more, or call 805-588 888-888-6917. And be sure and tune in next week at this same time for Patio Side Chat here on KSMA.